Hello again, and welcome into Interrupting Racism. I'm Brian Prawitz, and this is a place where I get to share conversations with some very, very interesting leaders in the state of Oregon, whom I've discovered through a relationship with the American Leadership Forum of Oregon. This is a program that's in partnership with ALF, and most of the people that you will find on our YouTube channel or in these conversations are senior fellows from the ALF program. You can learn a lot more about ALF at alforegon.org. But today we are going to be talking about food access, food security, global food um, generation, I should say, and access to it around the world with Katie Pearmine, who is with the Global Food Banking Network and an ALF senior fellow from Class 36, which means she's a recent graduate of the program. And she comes to us this morning with the opportunity to share another layer of where equity and policy and systemic uh, tradition and all of these things end up playing in a place where it was eye-opening for me to even have the conversation to find out just how deep some of our long-held policies and the work that gets done has an impact around the world in food of all places. But I'm sort of stumbling along because I don't want to keep stealing the thunder from Katie for the conversation that you and I had about a month ago or so. I'm just looking forward to sharing so much about your experience and such. So thank you for being on the program.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
First of all, let's read a little biography from Katie, which was on my screen just 1 second ago. And here we go. So having grown up on a family farm in the northern Willamette Valley, Katie has been working in food systems since childhood. She's currently the Associate Director of Global Product Sourcing at the Global Food Banking Network, where she supports food banks in 44 countries to source food for those experiencing hunger. Prior to working at GFN, Katie worked for Oregon Food Bank, where she led the team that sourced food for food banks in Oregon and Clark County, Washington. She was 4 years at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, where she spent a year as domestic trade manager and 3 years running a USDA grant program for Oregon. Her previous work also includes 10 years at a publishing and marketing firm, which focused on supporting local businesses. Over the years, Katie has also spent her free time working on food access issues by serving on the boards of directors for the organization Farmers Ending Hunger and Zenger Farm. She also is serving as a commissioner for the Land Conservation and Development Commission and chairs the advisory board for the Oregon State University Food Innovation Center in Portland. Katie is a fellow American Leadership Forum of Oregon from 2018-19, Class 36. Katie and her husband and her 2 cats live in the Foster Powell neighborhood of Portland. Isn't it awkward when somebody reads your bio like that and you're like, yes, and you're going, wow. Anyway, your bio is fantastic, and it really gives depth to the conversation that we're going to be having. And with the introduction I just gave, I kind of wish I just would have read that bio right from the beginning of the program without even trying to describe it all. So tell me about your current position with the Global Food Banking Network, and probably a little bit more about what GFN is.
Great. Yeah. So I am officially 3 weeks in to my work at the Global Food Banking Network. And our responsibility is to support food banks across the globe. So in 44 countries, food banking in the US is about around 50 years old. And food security obviously goes back to the dawn of time, really, with humans being on the planet, where we've been helping each other find food. And our organization is there to essentially support food banks, really, that are popping up all over the world. As we went into the COVID pandemic, essentially, we also entered a pandemic of access to food. So we're there to help these organizations that are popping up get food to people.
What I still remember from our conversation as we talked about this conversation was the story of how you got to this position, because it tells a lot about you and kind of an awakening of realization of just how powerful food access is and the way it connects up with equity issues. Why don't you kind of give us that path from that brought you to your position?
Great. Yeah, happy to do that. So I grew up, as you mentioned, on a farm in the northern Willamette Valley where food was abundant, and our family was growing food for the world, really. It was a 1,500-acre farm on the Willamette River with beautiful views of Mount Hood and just a very sacred place that we grew up on. And then through my life, I have been connected. Really, it started with my connection to the natural world and seeing the role that the natural world played in people's lives. I studied biology and chemistry in college and really got into understanding sort of the broader concept of sustainability. So the space where we are connected to our planet, we're connected to profits as businesses, and we're also connected to the people. And so my work had been really supporting businesses for about 10 years, working for a company that at the time in the early 2000s was defining really what sustainability meant on the West, especially on the Western US. So it's very exciting to be a part of that work. And then about 10 years in, I decided to make the pivot directly into food systems work because of the role that food systems play in every one of our lives. It was a very interesting space. So I specifically worked at the Oregon Department of Agriculture and got to run this grant program that was essentially helping our businesses here in Oregon get to market. And it's the kinds of things that we grow and we're really proud of here. So all of our fruits and vegetables, our Christmas trees, all the things that the USDA terms as specialty crops, but are actually essential to our health. And then I got really the bug of understanding the role that food plays as far as access and justice. And so on a couple boards that really were opening my eyes, and then got recruited over to the Oregon Food Bank, where I was able to open up essentially with what you're talking about today, understanding the role that food plays as far as justice is concerned. And so it was I had just started my role in 2014 and went to a conference in St. Louis, actually. And that was the time that literally Michael Brown had just been killed. And Ferguson was essentially really active, and people were obviously and rightfully so very upset. And I toured the food bank and really saw that most of the food was going to, especially the Black community in St. Louis area. And it was a big awakening to me, related to essentially the role that not having food really plays in the lives of people, and how it sets them into a space of scarcity. And then we have a role in something that's as abundant as it is in our world, providing access. And food is essentially a basic human right. So I definitely at that time recognized that I was doing civil rights work on top of humanitarian work. And that was my original awakening to essentially the role that food and racial justice play.
Was there a moment where it just struck you?
It was that moment of touring the food bank, and honestly the bus ride to the food bank where we left St. Louis, and being in St. Louis itself, it was one of those where there was a lot of white flight from St. Louis, beautiful downtown, and there's, obviously just a lot of systemic issues in that community. But on the bus ride, we passed Ferguson, and just seeing the disparity across communities, it was visually very stunning. And then just, it was like a recognition in the moment of who has access to food.
And was it one of those things where you kind of had an idea, or you'd heard something about it, or you thought you understood, and then suddenly it just was so clear that you had to, it changed the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those things that I felt in my body. So it was very clear to me that, and I do meditation, so that helps me be aware. And so much of this work really is in our body. We can tell when something's off, right? And so felt it in the moment, and it did change the trajectory of my career. So essentially, I also had the privilege at the time of going through a deep equity journey at the organization, at Oregon Food Bank. And it was just a simultaneous awakening to these issues that I don't think I would have really felt it the way that I did had I not seen it firsthand.
Mm-hmm. So what are the big lessons that we can take away? So you and I are, maybe we would fall into the category of being white allies, I suppose. And so if there were other people like us in our network of people, or maybe who look like us, how would you describe what you know now and what you saw in those moments, and where you basically do your work?
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it as essentially just going into a lifelong journey and being willing to go into a really messy, uncomfortable space that is not something that growing up in rural Oregon that had a very strong narrative that we're comfortable with. So we had all of the lessons of, be nice, don't say anything to rock the boat. There's sort of like a very strong messaging of, if you don't conform, then you're outside of the system. And so to break outside of that thinking is a big endeavor. So I would just say, folks that are like us, white folks that grew up in Oregon, stick with it, be willing to be curious, be humble, and really practice a deep journey of self-awareness while you're simultaneously becoming aware of these issues. And essentially I think one of our biggest limitations as humans is that we experience the world through our eyes, right? So we feel like we're separate, we're different, we're unique, but ultimately we're all connected. We're connected to the system, we're connected to one another. And our dedication to that connection is really what will bring us through.
Yeah, and I think about how that ties into ALF. So what was your ALF experience like? It's still very fresh for you, although most people that I talk to about their experience with ALF, it still comes to mind very easily and maybe on a daily basis. But describe how all this tied together for you when you were in ALF Class 36.
Yeah, so ALF, I would say, was the full spectrum of experiences. And really, because of the time that we're in such a polarized time, it was difficult. It was bumpy. And I think, part of this is that's the point. We, in a lot of our systems, in our networks, we get really comfortable and we enjoy that comfort and we do anything to go back to that comfort. So that year of visiting different parts of the state and having connections with people that are outside my essentially white middle class network was extremely valuable. And I got to think about and ask questions that I never had before. So specifically, we went to the Grand Ronde and or the Spirit. I can't remember the name of the casino off the top of my head. You probably know. But essentially became aware that the Grand Ronde obviously were on the land that I grew up on, and for thousands of years, so tens of thousands, maybe 12 to 14,000. And my limited awareness of being a family that came over on the Oregon Trail and having this pride of essentially in my mind growing up, time beginning when we arrived here, it was mind-blowing and embarrassing a little bit, to be honest, of wow, I known about it a little bit, but it was extremely humbling. And so ALF gave me that space essentially to muddle in that discomfort and to commit to sticking with it. And like you, I have lifelong friendships and deep connections to people, and my commitment to my own journey and this work has a lot to do with that.
Mm-hmm. Spirit Mountain is
Thank you.
You were, and I had to think about it just for a half a second. That was also a very spectacular weekend for our ALF class. In fact, it was for something that was said in the presentation triggered the religion conversation in our group, which you can talk about a lot of isms, but a couple things are class and religion are a couple of things where most of the people in those ALF classes are of the similar class and certainly privileged enough to be able to take a Thursday and Friday and go to another place and those sorts of things. But there were still, and I found myself also being able to relate to people who may or may not have anywhere close to the same background as I did. But if you would have thrown somebody of a different class in there, or you start diving into religious opinions and experiences, that's where the real test, I think, not real test, but an additional layer would be added. And essentially our class took over the the agenda for the day. And we were supposed to be talking about U theory, which I was going to refer to in context to what you're talking about. And U theory is the idea that you have to let go of some previous understanding in order to accept new understanding. And there's this process that you go through. Well, we ended up hijacking that conversation and having this extremely, and I still think probably to some degree, a little bit divisive conversation, though there was incredible acceptance in the room, quite a conversation. And as it turned out, we were actually literally expressing U theory in the conversation we were having. It just wasn't the topic that we were supposed to be talking about, which really is a sidebar to what you were talking about. So you're talking about feeling like a native to Oregon because of your history of your family settling the area, being a pioneer, and then you meet people who were here before time really began, and there's a totally different level of respect and understanding. I felt that too, and it also was at Grand Ron. And for those of you who don't understand much about ALF or know what we're talking about, it's this connection right here. This conversation is so interesting, and it happens all the time when people who are senior fellows in ALF talk, because we were not in the same class, and yet we can talk as almost though we were, because we had kind of a similar thing happen and we understand each other. And it's one of the neat things I think about the ALF program. So I don't know if you want to add any more to that or not, but.
Well, I mean, I would just say everywhere in Oregon, Indigenous people lived and roamed. And that part of what a big takeaway that I had, obviously in my rural school, I grew up K-8 school, 100 people. And it wasn't required at the time that we learn about Indigenous communities. And now it is in Oregon. So I think there's going to be a very exciting new awareness. And hopefully we'll see a sort of cascading of new signage that essentially tells us more of the story of the people who were here and stewarded this land for, like you said, time immemorial. And I just think as far as wherever you are in the world, there were people who were Indigenous, and becoming aware, honoring, understanding, and recognizing that there are still very thriving communities that play a huge role in giving back to our community. So that was, we did that same, we went down to the Coquel, which I know that you also had an experience with the Coquel. And yeah, again, just I feel like as an Oregonian who used the word native growing up, I no longer describe myself as a native Oregonian. I say I was born in Oregon, and on the land that I was speaking of, that I was so connected to on the Willamette River, that was my great grandfather was the first in our family to farm it. So my grandfather purchased it, my father, and now my cousins, my father and uncle farmed it, and now my cousins are farming. And it's a beautiful connection that we had. And it's also very recent. And so I would literally, something I did with my dad was walk as a little girl, walk behind him in the rows looking for arrowheads. And we would find arrowheads, we would find artifacts, so mortar and pestle. And, that was a sign, and there was a deep knowing of sort of the ancient that is around us all the time. But it was when it all came together at the Grand Ronde, that was again one of those moments I felt.
Yeah, and we live in the Umpqua Valley. We live along the Umpqua River, and so that whole idea, concept, memory, responsibility exists very strong in me. When I'm out mowing my front yard, I think 2,000 years ago, who was here and whose yard am I really mowing? So I wanted to touch on, and by the way, in the entire conversation around equity and BLM and some of the conversations that are happening, Indigenous people need to be part of that conversation. And I just want to pause for half a second and just say that in one of the things that I've learned the most since maybe over the last year or so is that as we talk about racial equity and injustice, and we settle on places like the Black community or the Latinx community, it's important also that we acknowledge the Indigenous people who also have endured incredible injustices over time as well. So just to put a pin on that. So boy, a lot of places to go. So I wanted to touch on, for some reason, youth theory now is stuck in my head. So, when you were talking about that moment at the food bank and that shift that happened with you, and then having a conversation with other people as you try to sort of convey what your new understanding, for me, it's finding people who are willing to possibly put what they know on the table and adjust it a little bit to new information. That's kind of youth theory. I wanted to get your take or your sense on that idea when you begin to describe the importance of equity when it comes to food access. What kind of things do you touch on, and what's that conversation like?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing this up. I can't help it. I'm going to plug a book. It's called You Belong. And the author is Sebene Selassie. And this is when you talk about finding in yourself, in your body that you connect. This book spoke to me in a way that really was the right time, right place. And your point about putting your experience on the table, I'd say it's putting it on the table and then stepping way back and then recognizing that every individual, we come into these bodies, we come into these forms, we have a limited experience, and that it's wonderful, and it's our point of view, and all around us are infinite points of view. And so this paradox that we live in, that we're essentially, we come into separate form and we experience the things separate, like staying connected to this sense that we are all still belong to each other and we have a responsibility to each other. So a part of that, as far as pivoting to the food system and how this shows up, obviously we just see the disparity. So it comes through in things like access to food, housing, education, and healthcare, and really all of these issues, these systemic issues that allow each of us the opportunity to thrive in the world. They too are interconnected. And food is this place where most of us can agree. We agree that we all deserve food, right? We know it sustains us. We know it's the thing that brings us together. It's what we do when we share with our families. It's what we do when we share in community. And so it's this place that even if we can disagree on multitude of issues, that we do seem to agree. So it's a beautiful place for us to talk about these issues. And then within the system itself, you know, there's a lot of unspoken disparity within who's tending to the food, who's moving the food, who's growing the food, and then who owns the companies, who owns the farms. And obviously with Oregon's history being that it is, you essentially have a lot of families like my own that own farms. And then you have a lot of community members that are coming through, either they are migrating through doing farm labor, or they are live in different parts of the community. And so that historical truth and current truth across the food system and the disparity in access to money, essentially, is living in our food system in a way that it doesn't show up in a lot of industries. So it's very apparent in the food system. And so you'll often have people who are growing our food, who are doing hard labor every single day, and they themselves don't have access to food.
That's a powerful picture. That's sadly ironic, isn't it?
And it's all over the world. I mean, so that's the piece about also when we step back from ourselves, of our state, and we step back and see what else is going on globally. This is happening everywhere. So just we share in this disparity, and I think that's important for us to also keep acknowledging.
What's being done to try to combat every farm that now has a subdivision on it? All the places that historically, just as for us, as you drive up and down I-5, you can see the famous Willamette Valley. But there's more and more pressure, as obviously as the world population increases. Are we tightening? Is there a bad thing? Are we headed toward a point of no return where we cannot generate enough food, period, to feed everyone? And as I say that, I think to myself, my understanding is that we actually do, and if there is enough food production for everybody on the planet, but probably in the United States, we probably eat it up to the point where other people don't have it. So I've touched on a few things there, and
Yep. And I think so the system itself is very flawed, the food system, right? We grow, and in many places we grow an abundance of food, and often it gets wasted. So it will end up sort of rotting on the vine or dying in the field because a market shifted. There are not enough folks to pick it. So the food system itself wastes about 40% of the food, which that alone, if we really focused on, rethinking our system, which is essentially what we're doing at the Global Food Banking Network, you can capture a great deal of that food. And it takes creativity, it takes innovation, and it takes a willingness to think outside our norms and reinvent markets. Essentially, we have to have markets for off grades, or the ugly fruit, as people are talking about. So I think that related to the food system, that's a big learning for us. I think we are going into a future that if we don't get better at the food system, there will be even more major problems. And we're seeing that with COVID too, where some parts of the world are going into where they were in a space of need. Now they're going into extreme need. So the pressure that we're going to feel on the food system, and then what we saw with COVID too, were these shocks and breakages within the system. We were hearing about all these fields that were getting plowed under, or animals that had to be euthanized. And that tells us that our system is not as resilient as we thought it was. And it's a big task for us to go to work and reinvent it.
So what are some of the barriers to that process?
I think there's, I mentioned market barriers. So essentially, when we as consumers require that our tomatoes look a very certain way, or that orange looks a specific shape, that we ourselves can play a part in being willing to and interested in seeing those shift and seeing misshapen fruit. It often is more delicious anyway. So as a consumer, you can play that role. And then also just essentially, not wasting food yourself. There's a big part of this that we have responsibility when we purchase food to eat that food. And so taking that ownership. And then at the systemic level, there is the need to essentially create new markets. So we call them like secondary or tertiary markets, where if it just is sold in different ways over time. You can't sell it in the retail environment, then you have a way that you can get it to restaurants or hospitality, and it can be an ingredient. Or all the way that and that was sort of our sweet spot in Oregon, is that we were able to talk with our pear growers and packers and shippers and say, what about those small ones? What are you doing with those? And they're like, well, they're going to the juice market. And we said, well, what if we paid you essentially a really small fee for that, pennies on the pound? You get a tax credit, you get a tax deduction. Is it worth your while for us to get that to the community? And because of that, we've moved millions of pounds of pears, onions, all of what we call kind of the hard seven in food banking. They're sturdy, they stick around a long time, and we grow an abundant amount here. So this was a great learning space for me in this work to see it on the ground. Same with onions, potatoes. So it took a while for our industry partners to recognize the level of need, first of all, that we were working in truckload quantities. We could send out a full truckload and pick up onions, potatoes, pears. And once our partners understood that, they saw the size and scale of the problem, they were all in. And we have such a generous agricultural community. And that was something I loved the most about the job, was essentially really seeing how heart-centered our agricultural community is. And I grew up in that community, so I knew that. But to have a way that could be expressed through giving was really incredible.
So a couple of things. One, so I'm going to ask the first question that's coming to my mind right now, where I'm hearing this. So what you're saying is, if I buy the less than perfect tomato or get a couple of apples that might be slightly bruised, in a way, I'm helping to combat the problem of global food system inadequacies.
Yeah, you're telling that retailer that it's okay for them to not exclude. So you know, there are all of these requirements that to go to market, things have to be a certain size, shape, color. And when we all say that we know it tastes just as good, then the retailer will start shifting their behavior. That's happening in Europe. It's happening in a lot. You'll hear these companies popping up. There's a company here called Imperfect Produce, where they're essentially doing deliveries of the misshapen fruits and vegetables. And so that it's just one small way. The other way is obviously innovation and technology within agriculture. So at the much bigger scale of agriculture, we're talking efficiencies in every way: water, energy, inputs, all the things that are there making our food. And then along the system, capturing as much of that food as possible and being really committed that we're willing to do that work. And, you know, the agricultural industry and food systems are extremely innovative. And so I think it's a really exciting time, actually.
That's interesting. So I'm learning some things today. So thank you for that, which is one of the reasons why I like doing these conversations. Another thing is, and you talked about how sturdy the what did you say, the main seven? Or
they're in food banking, we call them the hard seven. And we actually, you know, it's oranges, sweet potatoes. So those are the two things we don't grow, but apples, onions, potatoes. And then we have pears in our region, which a lot of the parts of the world obviously don't have pears.
Because I would think one of the limitations is also just shelf life, right?
Completely.
Yeah. How far can you move a particular item to get it to a place where it could benefit people who just that shift, the food system, I guess, is the way you describe it.
Yeah. And that's there are puzzles in this system like no other, and especially in food banking. So if you want to be solving puzzles, you go into food banking. And our goal is turns. So we try and get that food to people as quickly as possible. And when we're able to get it from a packer, shipper, or a farmer, it's got a lot more legs on it than when we get it from a retailer. So that's why it's a sweet spot working with the farmers and packers and shippers. So that's one aspect. And yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot of innovation. So apps are popping up where people are essentially able to go to a food site and directly donate. So there's all sorts of innovation in that space. And what I'd say is it's a fascinating thing about the food system where there is the most excess within the produce, and you said very perishable. We've essentially, in much of the world, had to completely redesign the way we were food banking. Food banking came from this sort of commodities. You'll see government cheese, boxes of oats and rice, much more less perishable to a much more perishable space, because many of our food deserts, they're missing produce. They're missing the things that really are the building blocks of health. And we blame people for the food they eat all the time. There's all this rhetoric around, blaming people essentially. And often they don't have access to the items that would provide them health, or they're too expensive. So when we surveyed our community here in Oregon, we found that people mostly want produce, milk, and some sort of protein. So meat, beans, that sort of thing. And, there's just this huge misunderstanding of how health and access to food are interrelated.
Mm-hmm. And now I want to take this into kind of a rural urban picture. So this moment that you talked about came from St. Louis, obviously a much more urban area than anything we have here, pretty much, but also certainly, say, in rural Southern Oregon. So how, and we talk about equity, and we talk about even potential racial inequality that plays into food access. So what does that look like when you talk about rural, and you've talked about rural a few times, but when I think of an urban center and who's receiving food boxes, you think about you talked about it yourself. It tends to go to communities of color more than Caucasian people. But in Douglas County, for instance, where we are something like 90% white people, many of the people that receive food boxes also are not in a community of color. So what can we see there? What's important to remember there when it comes still to food access, but maybe not necessarily across a racial boundary?
Yeah, I think this is such an important distinction, especially here in Oregon, but really across the U.S. too. But here in Oregon, I mean, I think that we know by the numbers still that we serve a lot of people who are Caucasian, and the disparity and systemic access happens across race, right? And it is compounded when you have other forms of systemic oppression. So it can be really hard when you're somebody who's experienced hunger as a Caucasian person to hear about, and I'm not, and I'll say that that's an extreme privilege, and more we're essentially trying to lead with folks that have experienced hunger in community, and that's a really important aspect of the work. But when we can't see each other. So here in Oregon, it's still by the numbers more Caucasian people. And in rural, I mean, I think we just know that folks have different levels of access and privilege, and that has everything to do with their essentially their access to money and wealth, and again, education, housing, and so this actually is something that brings us together rather than apart. When you're in a mode where you feel scarcity, we can't deny how hard of a time that is for people. And we really need to honor that it doesn't matter what your race or background is. If that's the space that you're in, we need to help. And that's what we're here to do for and with each other. And so I think when we talk about these systemic inequities related to race, we also have to be honest with what is true for a lot of our neighbors who are Caucasian, and that has been, that I think that's what can pull us apart often, when you hear people saying like, well, I don't have access. What do you mean this person of color doesn't have access? Neither do I. And so, I think we really need to honor that and hold that, and then have these honest conversations around what are the systems that are creating that lack of access for folks.
Yeah, because then you start really getting into a wide range of things, I think. Which potentially could be even more intense or awkward conversations around the table with whatever family you're able to get together with this holiday season, for sure. One of the things I like to ask people that I talk to on this program is, what are the sort of things that are just loud in your head right now that you see that's going on out there? And it may or may not pertain to the conversation that we're having right now. But what sort of things do you find yourself having conversations with yourself about these days with all the things that are going on?
Yeah, the loudest thing in my head related to what's going on is this feeling that we've grown so far apart in so many ways, and that essentially we are so much more alike and we have so much more in common, and that our life's journey is to really stay connected to one another. And it's easy to separate, or it's easy to find the difference, but it's more important for us to find our connection. And that this pattern that we're seeing of everything becoming political and everything becoming the space of, essentially a kind of a black and white thinking, I'm really, just want people to commit to each other and commit to sticking with it. So sticking with these difficult conversations, but from this place of honoring each other and honoring difference. And it's hard to see. For me, it's just been so hard, having grown up in a rural place, having such strong values of family and connection to the land, connection to people, to see these difference, the way this is pulling us apart. And here in Oregon, it's really clear. And it can be easy to slip into this othering and difference. And it's much harder to commit to this lifetime of, I'm going to stick with you. I care about you. I care about your humanity. And I'm going to see that light in you, just like I'm going to see it in my family. So going and committing to that, that's really standing out to me right now.
Yeah. Well, you're speaking right down the middle of where I'm at too, where so much time on social media and so much time connected to screens of all kinds, I think right now seem to feed that to some degree. And so thank you for saying that, because I think there's a lot of people that are in that train of thought, especially as we head into the holiday here.
Well, I'll just pick up on that to say, like, our words matter. And that when we speak them, obviously in person, it's much different than when you're on a social media platform and you're reacting and you're sort of going from this defensive, reactive place. And that we need to also commit to a way that we are caring and kind in our language. And so I'm really committed to essentially kind of nonviolent communication. And that one of people in my life said, at any moment, we're either going toward love or we're moving away from it. And that's true with our language. And so that is another piece of sort of notice. We all need to notice when we're feeling defensive and reactive, and step away from the keyboard and go take a walk, come back to this place of love.
I love that too. Well said. Well said. We're trying to do that in a non-communicative way or a non-verbal way with speakupwithus.com. This walked straight into a free advertisement here, by the way.
Nice.
We've got several different sayings on our shirts here at speakupwithus.com, including this one, which came from a mutual friend of ours by the name of Burke Nelson, who should definitely be on this program for sure. I should definitely be talking to Burke soon on interrupting racism, because he kind of gave me the nudge that put me down this trail that's led to this conversation today. So I did want to go over here. We do have a couple of comments. I thought I'd throw them up on the screen. First of all, this is really interesting, and this is pulling the curtain back quite a ways, but do you know Sheila DeCruff?
Sheila, right? Of course I do. Yeah.
I went to high school with her.
What? Amazing. So good to see you.
I think that's the same. I mean, there aren't that many, DeCruff is, and it might be DeCruff. I can't remember. I haven't said her name in forever. Anyway, she called you out or a little shout out there. So that's kind of cool.
She's a food banker in Ontario. She's amazing. Great spirit. Love to see you, Sheila.
Okay.
Thanks for all you do for our community.
And then Jane talked about when we were talking about Indigenous people and interconnectedness and the importance of food and quality food. So thank you, Jane, for that. And then here in our neck of the woods, Joanne Staymate Gordon, talk about small farms. There was a 7-acre commercial organic farm in Milo, supporting themselves for 30 years until the farmers retired. There's opportunity in the South Umpqua Valley from Canyonville to Drew. She mentions it because the valley is underutilized and disrespected by many. And you talk about barriers. There's a barrier right there. I guess perception in some ways could potentially be a barrier.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I really love both of these comments. First, the last comment really bringing back to Indigenous people and our need to ground in that. So thank you for bringing that up. And here, yeah, I mean, I think we have actually an extremely active small farms community in Oregon, and they need our love. They need our help. We need to be shopping at their farms, buying their community supported agriculture, going to farmers markets, supporting getting them into our grocers and food systems, our food service. And what they do for us during something like a pandemic, it was fascinating and terrifying, right? To watch essentially our food system go through this extreme pressure. You know what kept us together? It was those farmers that were growing in our community at a scale where they could keep it going. So they were able to get into our retailers. People were buying directly from them. And what they create this kind of resiliency within our food system that when we're not relying on it being imported, it creates not only that resiliency because we can get food just down the street, we learn how to garden ourselves, we're sort of seeing our role in supporting our local food shed. It then creates these deep community connections. We know who's on that land, we honor who's on that land, and we know the difference between something that is grown and tended to, and you can taste that difference. That's why we love our crops so much here. We love our hazelnuts and strawberries and, all sorts of deliciousness.
Farmers markets. So, I mean, I'm kind of a regular old meat and potatoes kind of guy. I like watching, football and working in my yard, and I don't know, I'm kind of just a guy, right? And then the farmers market. So you drive by the farmers market and you're like, wow, that's interesting and cool. But I've maybe it's because I'm older, maybe it's because I don't know, maybe I'm just open to more stuff. But a lot of my friends or guys that look like me don't really go wandering through the farmers market. But let me tell you, once you do, there's just a vibe and a feeling and a sense of connection and a granular grassroots thing going on when you can buy 6 ears of corn from the person that grew it. It's really great. And I totally agree with what you talk about is through the pandemic and food access and those things, because that was one of the rare places where you could actually kind of interface with other people at a distance and carefully. But what a value farmers markets have brought, and especially in this conversation about food access. It literally, I'm an entrepreneur. And so I'm always rooting for the interrupters to come, and food markets or farmers markets are kind of an interrupter in that normal food system that a lot of us, well, if it didn't come from a supermarket, then it's not going to come to my house. I got to buy it from, name brand X, but instead stepping into, so I would just encourage other people who may or may not have an appreciation for farmers markets to give it a try and go see what little gems there might be waiting for you on the other side of that sandwich board at the sidewalk.
Well, and it feels different when you're giving money to your neighbor and you are saying, I support your livelihood and thank you. I'm showing my care for you by being a member. And we need that more than ever, right? We need to stay connected to our neighbors. And so it's like you said, community doesn't gather in as many places as it used to. And it's a way that you can get into the community, and even with a mask and distance, being outside and get out there and go to your farmers market.
Well, Katie, I appreciate your time so much. I want to make sure if I left anything unsaid or if there's anything you want to kind of leave us with, I just want to make sure I didn't, if there's something else you want to make sure you say, this would be a great time for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, I started with this, and I think it's the most important, is that commit to curiosity, commit to humility, commit to self-awareness, and you're going to make mistakes. It's inevitable. And the key is saying, apologizing, making sure that you're healing with people, being humble, and get into that messiness. Again, it's not what the mainstream really has taught us to do, but it's what's going to change us. And then I'm going to also share this quote that I love. It's from Rumi, and it says, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world's too full to talk about. And that's the feeling when I think about staying connected together across difference, across rural and urban. Just remember that really there's something much greater that keeps us together.
That's nice. I'm going to have you, I'm going to get that from you. We're going to add that to the show notes. Okay. We're going to put that on there. We'll probably violate a trademark or something, but we'll make sure to do that and put a link also to your book that you showed there as well.
Wonderful. And one last thing, Maya Angelou told us that your legacy is every life you've ever touched. So touching, Brian, you bringing us together in this way, and for us to just remember that's what we're here to do, is to be with each other. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Stand by. I'm going to do a couple of housekeeping things, and then we'll chat again before we sign off here. But this is Interrupting Racism. It's a shared project with alforegon.org. If you'd like to learn more, please go to alforegon.org. And also, this is a really important time also that you can make a gift to ALF. You can visit alforegon.com for more information. And if you are a senior fellow in the ALF community, you've received an email recently from Lisa Watson asking for you to consider giving. So I just wanted to put in a plug for that, since we work very closely with them. Also would like to also promote our website again for our t-shirts with a few different sayings on them, hoping to just spark a conversation with people without even having to say a word. If you wear these out in your community, visit speakupwithus.com. The receipts, the revenue, I should say, will be donated to the Black United Fund of Oregon. So once again, thank you to Katie from the Global Food Banking Network. We'll have more on the show notes here when you watch this again on YouTube and also on Facebook. Please share this around. That would be fantastic. And we will see you again on another edition of Interrupting Racism very soon. Thank you.